Jeff Spangler, who's the Senior Vice President of Science and Agronomy at Troon, followed by a brief conversation with Dave Holm regarding the financial implications of the question of whether we overseed or not. And then we will have a question and answer session, and I would ask you to hold your questions until the end. Then, what I would like to ask you to do, because ultimately the board needs to make a decision on this, and our next board meeting is April 23rd, and this will be a hot topic of conversation, I'm sure. The overseed question has financial implications, and the board also has to approve next year's budget by the end of this month or very early into May. So, what I'm asking you as members to do is to listen to everything you hear today. The board will then take input from the Golf Committee and the Greens and Grounds Committee, and we want the members' opinion. So, about 48 hours from now, Dave Holm will open up a link on our country club site, and you can log in, and you will go to a link that gives you a chance to express your opinion. There will be 3 boxes. One will say, overseed yes. That would mean we want you to oversee the course just as you always do. Next box would say overseed no, which means we would prefer you do not overseed quail runs coming year. And the third box would probably say something like not this year, which means you know that probably at some point you need to overseed it, but you don't think that this is the right year to do that. So those are your 3 choices. When you log on, it records who's coming on the website, so you can't stuff the ballot box. And, yeah, you cannot vote early and often on this one. So we will then consider that opinion from the membership as well. We do want to hear from the members, and we want to understand how you feel about the issue. And ultimately, the board has to make a decision, and unfortunately, it's impossible to appease 100% of the people 100% of the time, but the board has to make that decision. So, having said all that, I'd like to introduce Jeff Spangler, the Senior Vice President of Science and Agronomy at Troon, to lead us through this conversation, to be followed by Dave Holm. Jeff?
Thanks, good morning. I'm Jeff Spangler, as Tom said, Senior Vice President of Science and Agronomy for Troon Golf. I'm one of the founding members of Troon. I've been with the company from day one. Built Troon North, came from Troon Country Club prior to that, so I have pretty good understanding on the soil and water issues here in North Scottsdale and what you guys are dealing with here as well. I'm amazed this many people want to hear about bad water and bad soil first thing in the morning, and I appreciate everybody coming out. Interestingly enough, the challenges that the club has here are about as most basic and fundamental challenges as that we have in agronomy, and the corrective measures are actually very easy to determine what to do. It's just the cost, the time consumption, and the length of time for those corrective measures to take effect are very slow and takes a long time. And of course, everybody is interested in having something happen immediate. It's just not the case with this kind of situation. So let's talk about that. I know all of you have a little bit of an idea on what the challenges here are. So the 2 are really the challenges of bad groundwater and the effluent water. But really the bigger agronomic challenges here is really the nature of the soils you have here. Everybody always wants to sort of point the finger at water. But in your case, at this club, it's really your soils and the texture and structure of your soils exacerbated by the water quality that are really the fundamental challenges. So let's talk about each one of those a little bit. Your water is a combination of groundwater and effluent water. Dan and I take regular water tests, and we talk about this stuff all the time. Water quality is really determined by 5 critical elements. The beneficials are calcium, magnesium, and potassium. The detrimentals are sodium and bicarbonates. So what we do when we measure water quality is we add the good add the bads and compare those to one another. And you would like a ratio of at least 50 to 50, of course. So what would mean is every time you water, you're putting some good elements out there that are counterbalancing the negative elements. Unfortunately, so both the groundwater and the fluent water here have almost no of the positive elements and a real high percentage of the negative elements. So our net ratio is as bad of any water quality we have in the company, with the exception of Australia Mountain Ranch out in Goodyear. So you have that going for you. You're not the worst. And then to further compound that, your soils here are what you would classify as very tight soils. They have a real high component of clay and silt. The other measurement of soil quality would be the addition of sand. But your percentage of silt and clay is so high, and that creates naturally slow draining soils. So then you start to add the poor water quality on it. Your naturally slow draining soils just sort of continue to cause this problem to fester more and more. So when I mentioned one of the most fundamental agronomic challenges we have to deal with is bad water quality and bad soil quality. And the corrective measures are really pretty simple and very easy to identify. There's really no magic recipe, no voodoo agronomy that's going to correct it. It involves three fundamental practices. The first is to apply amendments, beneficial amendments, that would displace the sodium out of the soil. Soil has the ability to hold on to nutrients electronically. What we would do, and what we're doing, is applying amendments that actually then break loose into the soil, attach to the soil particle, and kick the sodium out. That beneficial nutrient we're using here is gypsum, calcium sulfate. Fundamental product. It's part of critical agriculture in Arizona, and we've been committing to it for quite some time. First key step, again, displace sodium off the soil colloid. The second is to create some naturally forming drainage channels that allow that sodium that is now displaced off the soil colloid to move out of the root zone, move out of the system that the plant is growing into. Again, that's pretty straightforward and easy. Aerification, combination of hollow core and solid tine aerification. And again, we've been doing those, and we want to continue to increase that to a greater extent. The last one then is to, and this is where it gets hard to understand, is actually increase watering slightly to create some leaching, so the sodium now that you have displaced off the soil colloid, that is now into a drainage channel because you've been aerifying, you have the ability to move that through the profile. That's the fundamentals of your water quality and your soil. Really not very complex. But that's not really what you guys care about. Where we're at today is how do we get better, and what do we continue to do beyond what we're currently doing? Because what we're doing is marginally successful, and the club has some desires for improved golf course condition. So a couple of the other practices that are typically implemented in these type of situations is the addition of sand top dressing onto the top of the soil surface on the grass. And sand top dressing does exactly what you think it's going to do. It creates a more easily draining soil that helps us remove the sodium. The challenge with sand top dressing, it takes such a great depth before you have any real profound effect on being able to move that sodium away from the root zone of the plant. And you still have the fundamental soils underneath, so when that water moves through the sand, it would eventually hit the top of that soil and then just start backing up again, and we really haven't necessarily improved ourselves to the extent that we would like to. So, but that, at the same time, sand top dressing is a critical element to long-term improvements to situations like this. What's important to know with sand top dressing is you have to remain committed to it, light and frequent on a regular basis. You would like to get a minimum of 3 to 4 inches before you have really significant improvements on the current conditions. And you're still remain committed to aggressive soil amendment applications of gypsum, aggressive solid and hollow core aerification, and installation of drainage in low wet areas. So when we do move that sodium and water out of the profile, we have some mechanism to be able to remove it out of the system. Now, the more controversial part of this is what really the conversation is centered on to today, and as Tom outlined, the club will ultimately begin to decide what they want to do. So having very poor water quality combined with poor soil quality creates a huge amount of stress on the turf. And you see that out here every day. You see it in summer conditions, and you certainly see it in the survivability of the ryegrass. We have sodium levels so high here that cool season grass literally cannot survive. So our overseeding is a little inconsistent. We also have had a history of poor water and poor soil quality here, and historically, at least as far as we can tell, not a lot of corrective measures to improve what they were dealing with on a daily basis. So we're sort of trying to play catch up here a little bit. So with these natural stresses out there, one additional stress, and the most controversial part of this conversation, has to center on overseeding. The Bermuda grass, which has the ability to tolerate poor soil and poor water better than the ryegrass, is stressed a little bit by this, but not entirely. It can survive under a situation like this and actually provide a pretty good surface. The challenge becomes then when we introduce species competition to it by fall overseeding and winter overseeding with ryegrass. That creates a huge amount of additional stress to the Bermuda grass. So now we have a combination of 3 stresses, not just 2 stresses, and those 3 stresses become so catastrophic that it really compromises our ability to maintain a good summer playing surface. And a quality summer playing surface, good healthy Bermuda, actually lends itself to better overseeding the years we want to start the overseeding cycle again. So the idea on eliminating overseeding on some sort of rotating schedule at whatever the club feels works best for them really has fundamental agronomic merits. And by eliminating that last little stress, which has just become too great for the Bermuda to be able to withstand. In fact, for most of you who get around and play a lot of facilities, certainly the private facilities in this market, you've seen a trend over the last couple of years, which is to minimize the extent of overseeding. Either eliminate overseeding entirely. We manage the agronomy up at Desert Forest, and this conversation relating to non-overseeding takes place every year for the right reasons. But everybody's embraced some other ways of minimizing that a little bit, which is overseed a little bit later, overseeding with significantly less amount of ryegrass, preparing the overseeding process to a much less invasive process so you don't damage the Bermuda as much, and then spray out the ryegrass much earlier in the year. So the overseeding window has shrunk in this market considerably. In fact, the amount of ryegrass sold in this market has decreased about 50% from the high water mark about 15 years ago. So that conversation relating to overseeding is something that I think is really worthwhile for the club to consider. It wouldn't be something I think that you would have to embrace for the rest of the history of the property, but take the opportunity to begin to rebuild some fundamental Bermuda health here, allow the other practices to take place, improve some of the fundamental agronomy here, and then get back into a cycle and more in line with what you're traditionally seeing. that's the big picture outline. Do you want to do some Q&A relating to it right now, Dave, or do you want to get into it? Dan, do you want to add anything? Yeah.
You know, every year, you guys put on so much bloody water that hillsides cannot handle that water. Why can't you put on, let's say, like 5/10ths of an inch? I mean, not 5/100ths of an inch, excuse me. And then, because what we're doing is we're going out there every morning, the golf course is so wet that the carts are going down there, the water is flying away, you've got compaction 101. Somehow or another, you've got to put less water on, at a more timely use of the water. Somehow or another, you've got to get the carts off of the landing areas, up and come back down in. What's going on right now is just compaction, compaction, compaction. And you never ever said one thing about compaction.
Well, compaction is really the interrelating function of the soil texture that we talked about, the silt and the clay. So if you look at our water statistics, we really water in line with what the requirements of the plant are. The challenge that we have is our soil structure is so far gone here. Even a small amount of water here doesn't have the ability to move through the soil. So it has a really wet appearance to it. When you have tight soils, silt and clay, that have a very high percentage of sodium amount to it. In fact, our soil colloid here has 80% sodium on it. You want that to be around 10%. What happens is the soil structure changes so dramatically, it gets real pasty. It's like clay. It has a real weird texture to it, and that water will not move through that system. So whether it's 1/10 of an inch or an inch, the golf course would play the same very wet. But that's a legitimate conversation to have. You want a golf course to not be overwatered. It's a big expense for most facilities. We have an automated irrigation system. We've developed variability to it to where the low areas don't get watered, the high areas get a little bit heavier. But the soil situations here are so challenging, it really makes that whole watering situation so much more difficult.
Does overseeding require less water then? And then what do you think of if you overseed of dying the grass afterwards?
So of course, if we don't have cool season grass out here in the wintertime, we're not required to water the golf course. But our percentage of water use on ryegrass is such a small percentage of the overall water use here. But yes, we would not have to overseed. And by the way, I need to add one other key component to all this. We need rain. That's such a critical element in this situation. And we've had 0.8 of an inch since July 15th here. There's nothing we can do to it. But to your second point, one of the new technologies that's available, one of the old ways of handling this situation was literally paint your golf course. Spray latex paint out there, and people still do that today. It's probably not the right way to do it. It can track, it can get a little bit messy, but there are some new chemicals out there called pigments that have been developed that allow a tinning agent to get into the grass plant, not on the surface of the grass plant, and that helps create some color during the dormant season. So if the club decided not to overseed one of the courses one year, we would begin to spray pigments probably late August, early September, get that into the plant and keep a pigment process going all throughout the winter, about 3-week applications. We no longer overseed at all in Southern California anymore, and we rely exclusively on the use of pigments. And in a good year where it's not excessively cold, they don't get quite as cold as we do here, but when it's not excessively cold, the shortcut turf, like the tees and the fairways, you retain such color you almost can't tell it's not actively growing Bermuda grass. So that would be a critical element to the steps moving forward.
From an overseed standpoint, 100% overseed maximizes the stress on the Bermuda. Is there a percentage of overseed that would minimize the stress and still give you a green golf course?
Sure. A compromise decision would be to oversee the less rate, but you're not getting quite that same quality playing surface that you would had you overseed it at a higher rate. And my recommendation in a situation like that, if the club wanted to head down that path and seed at a lighter rate just to maintain some color but not really a playing surface, my recommendation would go all in. Let's just eliminate overseeding 1 year, since you're really kind of doing that anyways with a light overseeding rate, and you're really not doing what you really want to do long term. But of course, that would be an option. Back there.
What is the cost difference between overseeding and not overseeding?
Well, there's three fundamental costs. The cost of the seed, which is anywhere between $35,000 and $50,000 on an 18-hole facility. There's the cost of the water that you pay for during the winter time, and I'm not sure what your water costs are here. They're high, yeah. So there's some water cost savings during the winter months because we're not watering as much, and that could be over a year's period of time, maybe 10%. Which starts to be a pretty significant number. And then there's the cost of eliminating the need to fertilize the ryegrass. So it could be anywhere between, what have you guys mapped out, 100 to 125,000 or so? So, but that money would most likely be reallocated to other activities taking place on the golf course. Not true savings. So if you decided not to overseed 1 year, we probably wouldn't have an 18-hole budget that had $125,000 less. What we would prefer to do is use that money or reallocate that money to sort of some of the other more beneficial programs. Start top dressing a little more, get a little more gypsum out there. Reallocate that money that are going to lead to the betterment long term. There's some hands over here, yeah.
First, I'd like to thank you for taking your time to come out.
You're welcome.
I have two questions. The first is, to what degree do you think personal home water softeners contribute to the sodium concentration in the effluent?
Somewhere between 90 and 100%. So that's a
Personal home water softeners should be changed to portable exchange devices and get the sodium out of our water that we're sending back to the effluent.
Now that's in your affluent water, that's not in your groundwater. And your groundwater has naturally high sodium anyways. A lot of communities in California are mandating requirement homeowners to switch over from sodium chloride water softeners to potassium chloride. Potassium's about 4 times the cost of sodium, so there's been some sort of resistance because of that. But that's a really legitimate conversation for communities to have amongst themselves. How do we want to treat our water? Because remember, when you're putting those sodium pellets in your tank, that sodium is going to the wastewater treatment plant and it's coming right back here at you in higher sodium levels. Your sodium levels are literally climbing a little bit each year because of that.
My second question is more of a clarification. If we don't overseed, then the fairways will be dormant Bermuda. And as you play on that, then some of us, some more than others, take divots. That divot is then filled with sand, but the Bermuda is dormant, so it's not going to fill in. So over the period of 3 or 4 months, in a popular landing area, say in various fairways, there will be multiple divots filled with sand. Is that?
That's correct. In fact, that's a fair assumption, and that is one of the consistent comments we hear in situations where we used to overseed and we no longer overseed. Divots don't recover. But sometimes this 2 steps forward requires maybe a half a step backwards. And this might be one of those situations where for a year We might have to accept that little more divots because we're not getting quite the recovery, knowing the health of the Bermuda is going to improve significantly. But if the club really decided that not overseeding was the choice, there would be some other things we would do ahead of time. We would allow the Bermuda to grow up a little bit in the fall so there's sort of more meat and mass there, a little healthier condition. We would try to minimize kind of how tight and hard and fast this gets throughout the winter.
I'm not familiar with the process, so do you still overseed the tees and greens and leave the fairway? Or?
Most likely, yeah. Certainly greens. And tees, par 3 tees are typically always done in a situation like this, but I think we would probably do the tees as well. That would be a conversation. I think if this got a little more momentum and the club had a better understanding of what we'd want to do, we'd start to look at some of the small parts of it. I think you had your...
Yes, sir, I have two questions. Number one, how many golf courses, say from Troon North, Troon Country Club, this direction, are not overseeding?
All of our courses are overseeding. Now
So all of what's in our competition area is overseeding?
Yes.
Has anybody analyzed the effect it would have on new membership?
We haven't.
No.
Yeah,
Because of the
yeah.
economist, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if we have.
Yeah, I'm not that I'm aware of. Dave would probably be better able to answer that question. But there's a continuation of that conversation. Part of that conversation centers on what are the effects this year to the golf course quality by not overseeding. You're not as green. But the continuation of overseeding in this situation with your water and soil quality compromise the health of Bermuda. So each year it gets a little weaker and a little weaker. So pretty soon your long-term year-round agronomy is compromised to it. So what's that balance? You know, taking the decision to not to overseed 1 year and the impact potentially on membership sales and those things versus improving to something greater long-term and building a golf course that's had higher conditions over a longer period of time, and what are the benefits of that on your real estate and membership sales. So there's a couple of ways of looking at that.
I have a water question for you, and that is, what can Rio or utilities do to improve the quality of the water? And what obligations do they have to improve the quality of the water? And since we are spending so much money to fix the problem, do we not have damages, and why don't we go after these guys legally, hit them over the head with a 2x4, and get some quality water so we don't have this problem? Typically,
in the water quality requirements by water services like Rio Verde Utility, the water quality requirements are based on the biological factors, not the nutritional factors. They're most likely meeting the requirements that that they're obligated to provide to you.
Even though they're causing damages to us?
They're providing the water that...
They're also providing damages.
I think they would be able to, I'm not a lawyer, but they would be able to argue this is a natural product and we haven't done anything to make it worse.
Have we had any discussion with a lawyer?
I don't know about a lawyer, but we've talked to the water company. But that's a very, very interesting incentive not to do it, right? Anything we're asking them to do would be cost to them. The way the wells are set up around this property, all the water quality from the wells is not the same. And each of the courses that are on these wells receive different water from one another.
Why can't we go to a different well?
Though you do not have an infrastructure in place that allows you to be able to do that.
Our problem or their problem?
I think it's your problem. Well, I think it's worthwhile to have the conversation. I don't know. These are, Dave, where are you guys with the utility companies and talking to them about?
Yeah, we continue discussions with utilities. Unfortunately, well 3, which has the better quality water, doesn't produce enough water and it already has the infrastructure hooked up to, is it,
Verde River and the Peaks Course.
Yeah, the Peaks Course, so they've already got the infrastructure and it cannot provide enough water for the additional golf courses.
So I sat on an advisory board a number of years ago with the 22 water users on the RWDS line that supplied water to all the North Scottsdale courses. Those 22 courses were facing a situation exactly like you are facing here, or actually even a little bit worse. 98% of the homes on that water line had sodium water softeners. And our sodium quality was getting greater and greater and greater, and literally destroying the quality of those golf courses, 22 of the most famous golf courses in the world. We had zero legal opportunities to go to the city is the bottom line after working with it further and further and further. And we had to eventually reach an agreement with them where they agreed to make some slight improvements. We agreed to pay for the improvements, but we didn't really have a legal
I find it hard to believe that it's cost us about $150,000 a year to fix these problems, which in my term are damages, and we have no recourse to that.
The damages are, I can't speak to it. Let's have a lawyer talk to it if the club feels like it. You're dealing with a natural product that they're not manipulating to your detriment. It's what's natural.
If you don't oversee one course 1 year, is that a significant impact on this improvement cycle you're looking for? Or do you have to do one course every other year for the next 10 years? Can you predict?
Yeah, that's a really important conversation relating to all this. The situation here, again, this perfect storm of poor water quality, poor soil quality, the stress of the overseeding, and the costs associated with kind of minimizing that. It's a very long, slow process. Even with the addition of increased gypsum applications, sand fairway top dressing, installation of drainage in your fairways, increased aerification programs, you still have some real fundamental challenges here that's going to take a long time to ultimately turn around. But that's a big part of it, taking that small step forward, getting better and better and better. So to answer your question, the ideal situation from the agronomy perspective would be never overseeding, but of course operationally that just doesn't make sense. So you would probably try to figure out something in between those two extremes of overseeding every year, never overseeding, and what works best for the club. It starts with taking a year off. And maybe doing one course 1 year, another course another year. Let's get an idea and really what that does for us, and then build a long-term plan of what we think we should do. Our conversation at some other clubs, centered on let's take 1 year off, overseed 3 years, take 1 year off, overseed 3 years, that kind of a scenario. But you've got some very chronic challenges here that it could take a long, slow time to correct.
Can you define a long time? Because we keep hearing it's going to be a long time. And the second part of that is how much shorter is not overseeding make that long time? So, I think we all agree there's an issue, but we keep hearing a long time. That can be 10 years. It could
Okay, all right.
So we get gradual improvement, but we're still busy.
You'll never be Augusta National. You just can't, right? You can't get that. I'm just setting, the challenges here are significant enough where you're not going to reach that, regardless of whatever you spend. You're not going to reach sort of that pristine level. But already in the couple of years that Dan's been here in the implementation of some of these programs and practices, watering better, implementing cultural practices, making soil amendments, the property is getting better. This would be something that the club would have to remain committed to for as long as the property's here. And I think you would see small increment improvements every year. The less you overseeded, the bigger those improvements would be, but that would come at way too big of a cost to the club. So Slow but steady, I think, is probably the best way to describe it. You're never going to really totally round that corner.
Is there a more salt-tolerant seed that we could use that we're not using?
We're using the most salt-tolerant ryegrass seed right now. And people refer to that conversation a lot. Salt-tolerant ryegrass is one ryegrass being more salt-tolerant to the other, and they use that expression. The reality of it is the statistical difference between those two varieties are very, very, very small. There's really no significant fundamental differences that make one be able to survive a sodium situation and another not.
Even on ocean courses where they get a lot of...
Those use paspalum. That's an entirely, and they don't overseed. So where you have Bermuda grass, a high sodium course would use paspalum.
And we can't use that.
It wasn't available at the time this golf course was built. Now, you could ultimately, this is a can of worm we probably don't want to go into, maybe a long-term plan ultimately from now would be to convert the property over to paspalum. You would have much better summer conditions, but paspalum can't be overseeded, or it can't be overseeded quite as successfully as Bermuda grass. So that's probably a conversation that stops pretty quick.
We're now putting acid in our water.
Correct.
To counteract the sodium,
The bicarbonates.
the bicarbonate.
Yeah. So remember, the two negatives in the water measurement are sodium and bicarbonates. Sodium is exactly what you think it is, sodium. Bicarbonate, the challenge with the bicarbonate is when it enters the soil profile, it splits into carbonate, and those carbonates then grab the last remaining beneficials. So then you start to lose magnesium carbonate, potassium carbonate, and calcium carbonate out of your system because of the bicarbonate. What acid injection does is minimizes the splitting of that bicarbonate when it hits the soil system, so we're not further stripping the beneficials because of the high bicarbonate.
Is there something we could inject into the water system to reduce the salt content?
No. The only way that's really been done is the construction of a reverse osmosis plant. And, that's tens of millions of dollars. And then you have a real fundamental problem of, so when you treat 3 gallons of water in a reverse osmosis system, you get 1 gallon of brine. What do you do with the brine? It's...
Who would you hold up as a poster child club of someone that's done this process? And is there some place, especially now back to Dick's question, of all the sand and the divots and all that, where we could drive over and look at what the playing surface is?
Well, one of if you look at the measurement of water quality, the places that struggle the most are in this little Rio Verde Valley. So our Fire Rock facility, what's the course next to Fire Rock? Eagle Mountain. Exactly, but they all have about the same situation, the same quality. Town Verde. I think you guys have actually now kind of risen above Town Verde in quality. Have we? Okay. So here in this market, you guys are kind of on the sharp edge of it and the guinea pig. So, nobody really has this kind of challenges to the degree for a long period of time and corrected it.
So Australia Mountain's not doing it then? You said they were the worst, they were doing this worst, so they're not doing it.
So here's Australia Mountain's challenge. They had such high sodium out there. They were overseeding. They developed a new fungus affecting the grass that became world famous in the world of golf agronomy. Chytridiomycetes, and they have a whole nother level of challenges out there. Yeah. But they also, though, have different soils, and that's a critical component. Your challenges are how your poor water quality and your poor soil qualities work together. They have a much looser soil, much more of a decomposed granite, something that has greater natural percolation rate. So we don't get that buildup of moisture and the wet, sort of pasty conditions that you guys have here. He asked, he said one of the points that we discussed was the use of pigments to create sort of more artificial green look during the winter time. How effective is it? It's effective, but it does not make your Bermuda grass look like it's summer green. It has a nice green tinge to it, depending on the type of weather we're having in the wintertime. If we have really super cold winter, it would still start to look fairly dormant. But if it's a moderate winter like we would have had this year, the use of regular pigments, it would maintain some reasonable greenness to it. Dan, you were ready to say?
We apply pigment to the greens right now.
To the greens?
We got Indian phosphate.
To the greens, yeah. And look at your greens. But you're overseeding your greens.
Yeah, at a lighter rate.
Yeah.
Can you continue to overseed and then deep tie in the fairways and dress it with sand, 6-8 inches to get that sand down, mix it with gypsum, get that down into the root zone where you want to be?
That would be the goal. And that's probably about a 10-year plan.
Even the northern courses, deep tying sand fairways twice a year just to get rid of organics.
Well, we are deep tying right now.
I've only been here 2
Yeah,
years. I don't remember the fairways.
we're verifying constantly during the summertime.
Oh, in the summer.
Yeah, not during the winter time. It's too disruptive.
Winter's when we get our compaction.
Compaction is not quite the problem here that you would think it would be in another situation. The fundamental challenge is here the combination of the sodium with your soil texture and soil type that creates a very tight appearance. But anything we can do to minimize traffic always has beneficial results, right? Carts off cart paths, minimizing those sort of things. Those would help, but those are knockout punches. That's not going to turn this place around into a pristine golf course by making those kind of choices.
Excuse me. You said earlier our problem is a combination of poor water quality and poor soil. Did we start off with poor soil, or do we now have poor soil as a result of 40 years of poisoning it with poor water?
No, it was all. So this is a floodplain area for historically over hundreds of thousands of years from the Rio Valley. So it just has, as this river has moved over the years, it's deposited silt and clay out throughout different regions. So this would have always had that fundamental challenge.
So our soil here is the same as what they have in Tano and Trilogy?
You have the same parent materials. I don't know what they've done to amend soils at construction at all, or are you familiar with that? No, it's basically the same. Trilogy might, since they're a little higher up, might have a little lower percentage of silt and clay, which would benefit them.
Is Trilogy getting better water quality than we are?
I don't know, Dan. Yeah.
They're on the best well in our drinking water.
Are they on well? They're on well 3. They're on well 3. Yeah.
So again, why can't we change wells?
It's a conversation for the water board. I think it's worth having.
Why wasn't that addressed at the last rate case?
Well, we sat down with the utilities. We looked at well 3, and as mentioned earlier, well 3 does not produce enough water for all the golf courses. I don't know why they built the infrastructure for it to go to Tonto Beach Course and the Trilogy. That was built within their infrastructure. So I don't know how to better answer the question. But it is, it doesn't produce enough water. If we sat down with Jim Thompson and Mike over at the water utilities to
So
see
we're
if
not
that-
paying a monthly premium to supply them with good water.
We will continue to sit down with the water company and discuss options, but I know right now that well doesn't produce enough
How
water.
soon will you sit down and talk to them?
We sat down a month ago, we continue discussions to
How
figure
about doing
out.
it on a weekly basis to put some pressure on them to give us good water? Because we're attacking this with a bad hand.
As Mr. Spadler stated, they have a level of quality they have to provide to us, and and they are meeting that level of quality. You know, at this point, we can continue discussions, and I don't know how far we get with them, you know, from building an infrastructure, what that costs, and again, back to the well, not being able to produce enough water for all the golf courses.
So you're telling me we have a problem that's never going to be solved?
Probably not. They put the pipes in 25 years ago when they built these things.
You can manage that program, and that's what we're talking about.
Do we have any alternatives?
And that's what we're trying to do, is trying to, knowing that it looks like, at least for now, we have our soil what we have. That's not going to change. And at least for the short term, we have the water quality that we have. What we're trying to do is provide a pathway working with those that minimizes how those affect the golf course.
Is there anything that can be done at the water treatment plant level to help us fix this problem?
No. Not unless you start to head down the path of reverse osmosis.
Okay, do we have any alternate way we can go, such as getting it from Scottsdale or from the Indians? Try to pump water to our lakes?
From the reservation.
Yeah.
I don't know what
their
the
allocation.
Yeah, I don't know what their allocation is, what they can pull out of the river. I know that for the pecan trees and the groves, they pull directly out of the river. I'm not sure what their allocation, what they're allowed to pull out of the river. I know SRP and everybody, you know, with the aquifers have, you know, pretty tight control over that. I just know where our wells sit and how far they've gone down and drilled. You know, one's a little deeper than the other, and I think, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, it's producing the same, that the well 5 and 8 are producing pretty much the same quality.
5's a little better. 8's the worst, furthest from the river.
Right.
Maybe you could write to the letter and see if any negotiations get going.
Yeah, I think about it. Definitely not out of the question.
They could dump the water in the desert.
So getting back to...
No, sorry, there's somebody behind you. Yeah.
I'm just going back to the pigments, because is that going to come off on our shoes and our balls and our hands like that?
That's the difference between pigments and paints. The question is, if we use pigments, does it get on the ball or get on your shoes? Paints would, certainly in a wet environment. Pigments won't. They'll get into the plant, and it's not there on the surface where it can get on your ball, or even if it's wet. Yeah. Right now, you're currently using them on greens. Do you notice any?
Okay, getting back to our water management. Okay, we're stuck with this well, the huge casing well. We're stuck with that. Why in God's green earth are we so wet every doggone morning? Don't we have a better plan than that? Can't we spin those a little bit quicker and do it more often instead of having all the water come off of the hillsides and come down and pool down into the fairways? Can't we do anything better than that? I mean, if you had to, every gallon of water that you use, if you had to come in your pocket and put a dime down, that would make you do a little bit better water management.
Well, water management here is good and sophisticated. We have such fundamental problems here, though. It's creating the impression you feel like we're not.
On the fire. You're throwing more water at it. You're throwing more water at it. We're driving through water every stinking day.
That's one of the challenges you have when you have very high sodium affected soils.
Less water on?
Dan, what's your water statistics?
So,
Okay, from historic levels.
We don't have good draining soil. So last week we lost the Whitewick pump station. The next day we had hot spots everywhere. Unfortunately, our ability to maintain good moisture in the soil is non-existent because we can't flush anything down. So if I back off the water, we're going to lose ryegrass. If I increase the water, it's just going to get wet. It has nowhere to go once it's applied turf. And if we don't apply enough, we're going to lose ryegrass.
We agree. There are some challenges here. The challenges are really high sodium water with bad soils that need some corrective measures. We understand your frustrations and the challenges. And the place is getting better every year. The place has been getting significantly better. Go ahead. Yep.
Seems pretty simple to me. Don't overseed, don't need to water, put in the green pigment, you don't have wet spots, the turf will get better over time. It's that perfect.
If over time, with adding the sand top dressing, like one of the discussions we've been having is adding a half-inch this year. If we add a half-inch of sand and over the time get to 3 or 4 inches of sand, will that help the water issue and the wetness on the...
Significantly.
Significantly.
Yeah.
So you have to go through the process to get where Bucky wants us to get with, and maintain the grass at the same time. So we need the sand to get that percolation.
That's a really good observation. The addition of sand top dressing will improve the feeling of the wetness surface, plain surface, greater than it actually solves your sodium challenge. That sounds like it's a significant factor, and it would be a big step forward. It'll create a drier, more firm plain surface.
I have one question. Getting back to the water softeners with the salt. I just want to ask that question. Is it going to take, if we forbid everyone to have one and change them, how long would it take to get rid of the stuff that's in the ground, or won't it ever?
You are going to always have high sodium water here. You're just not going to have catastrophically high sodium water. You would still have water that would be classified as challenging for landscaping use.
In the peak season, are we maybe using 7% of our needs with reclaimed water? Maybe 7%?
How much reclaimed are we using? Is that?
I mean, our percentage of our...
Water is not the big thing. The big thing is they dug a well, and the well, a huge casing well, has got more salt in it than the reclaimed water.
I think 70% of our effluent usage is in the winter because everybody's here in the winter flushing toilets and running their, so all that, the effluent's not being used in the summer because nobody's here. It goes down to like 5% usage, up to 70% in February, January. So much of the effluent water is all being used in the winter months when we're trying to produce the best product with the ryegrass. Sodium levels in the effluent water is astronomical. Sometimes 3,000 pounds per acre foot on average per month.
Well, we've been through this before with this overseas, and it didn't work the last time.
We did it 1 year.
So if we're going to keep with the same water practices that we've had in the past, it isn't going to work this time either. It's like fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
It won't work in 1 year.
The difference is the same, is putting the top dressing on will help the water over time, right?
It's getting that soil profile, that 4 inches of sand underneath there. The last time we did this, we did it for 2 whole years. Expected miraculous recovery. We didn't get it, so we stopped. And we didn't put enough sand down for a whole variety of reasons. What we're suggesting this time around is a process that is going to take 10 years, let's say. Let's commit to a 10-year process. If we don't, we're not going to get it any better. And the water practices, I remember last winter on a particular day, it rained on a Saturday. It was Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday we were playing. And somebody said, I know a couple things. One of them I know is that we watered this golf course altogether too much. It was a wet day. It had rained on Saturday. And we had a Ground and Greens Committee meeting that morning, and I asked Dan specifically, how much water have we put on the golf course since Saturday? And the answer was 0. 0. We weren't overwatering, we weren't even watering, for Pete's sake. And we were still wet Tuesday. And that goes directly to the soils not being able to drain the water out here. And that's what the problem is. We can try to change the water, but we're not going to get there. We're going to get there by fixing our soil. We could get there another way. Bulldoze, bring in 12 inches of sand, re-sprig with Pascalum while we're at it, and
we have to keep in mind what Mr. Spangler said earlier, is that if we're on the right track and we're going through this process, every year gets a little better. It isn't like 10 years, we have 10 years for it to happen all of a sudden. Every single year, we're getting better as we proceed.
We're putting another half of an inch of sand down. We're resting that Bermuda base. We're proposing that we overseed one, overseed the other, overseed both, overseed one, overseed the other, overseed both, turn that into a practice whereby we improve the golf courses over time. What will they look like 10 years from now? Who knows? We believe science is telling us that they're going to be better. 10 years from now, we're probably overseeding again. But if we're not careful, we turn back into overseeding them both, and we do that for several years in a row, we start to damage that. We can put ourselves right back in that situation again, and I don't think we want to be there.
Turfgrass challenges or golf course conditions are the relationship of multiple variables working together. It's never just one thing. So if we quit overseeding, it's not going to all of a sudden make this place better. Or if we continue to overseed but just sand top choice, it's not going to make the place better. If we just put gypsum application out there but not aerify, not overseed, they're all small components together that need to work. They're part of the puzzle that need to work together. And each one of them is a small, intricate part, which just causes this thing to sort of move very slowly. But each one of those parts are easy to identify, have to remain committed to, and this place will continue to move forward.
Tom, you mentioned, I think I heard, what I heard was that in 48 hours there will be a spot on web. And you referred to voting in regards to 12 runs. Are we voting in regards to one course, or whether it's yes or no, or wait? You didn't mention whitewater, so I'm not sure, are they both of them on?
I don't think we're there yet. I think we're talking about finding out if 1 year of rest on Quail Run is worthwhile and produces results.
What are we actually voting for?
Well, first of all, I don't want to wordsmith it. I won't call it voting.
Okay.
I'm asking for opinions from the members.
What are we opinioning?
Your opinion on whether or not this year we should not overseed quail, or we should overseed quail, or intellectually we know you should not overseed it, but we don't think this is the year. Those are the three
But we're only
choices.
voting in regards to one course.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sounds to me what
We're only
Kelly
opinioning
is a plan. Don't overseed this year on one course. Sounds like a plan. Good.
I don't know if you put a rumor or not, but if we don't oversee one course, then we would have more money, and we'd be able to put more sand on the other courses?
That's the idea.
How much more sand would we be able to put on if we don't oversee?
Well, quite a bit. Another half inch or so in there to be able to do some sand top dressing that would help accelerate that process a little bit. But that's a really good point. A lot of people, when they eliminate things like overseeding, they talk about it's going to save us money. You only save money if our golf course maintenance budget is $100,000 less the next year because we didn't overseed it versus the year we overseeded. That would be saving money. Our recommendation here would be to reallocate those funds to things that accelerate the improvement process here. And the two parts of that would be sand and amendment applications.
Don't you also have the deep time machine now?
We do, yeah.
And that should make a difference.
We're running that all the time during the summertime, yeah.
Just for clarification, and going back to Randy's comments, I think, put your ass on the line here. What are you recommending currently in terms of what we do for the next 10 years? One course, the other course, and then both? Or is there another system? Or what, What are you telling us you want?
What I would advise the club on is that the combination of your water quality, your soil quality, creating the stress on the plant, the addition of overseeding adds another stress level. It's for the club's decision to determine what sort of level of stress that is and what is more beneficial to you. Creating long, slow improvements long-term by sacrificing something every once in a while in the wintertime when everybody's here playing at the what place would be long-term. It's not for me to answer. I can tell you overseeding creates stress on the Bermuda grass and compromises your summer playing conditions. That's what I can tell you.
You don't have to. You can have to stand up and take responsibility for it. But is your recommendation the one course, then the next course, and then both courses?
Well, if I have my agronomist hat on, I would tell you any stress you can eliminate to this property would help this place long-term. But it's not my choice. I don't play golf here in the wintertime. I don't know how this club really wants this place to look and feel. I can tell you that's a stress to the system, and we need to eliminate stresses out here if we want this place to move forward long-term.
Part of the problem is that there's not many 30-year-olds out here.
Do you know what the average age of Troon Country Club is?
I'm the only one.
We face that a lot. We hear that in other situations, yeah.
Our eyes glaze over when you talk about long term. You mentioned that the potassium water softeners take the salt out of the water, is that right?
It puts so sodium chloride eliminates the sodium out of the water. Potassium chloride would do the same thing, but potassium is also a salt, so the problem doesn't totally eliminate with the use of potassium chloride. It does get significantly better, and there's a lot of California communities that are mandating the use of potassium chloride water softeners. Now, what degree of compliance they have with that, it's hard to say.
Can you not do that same process with the effluent? It might be hard to I don't think you'd ever get it through to have the...
You would go through tons and tons. If you're talking about putting a massive water softener at the effluent plant, it would be tons.
Individual house, it seems to me it'd be more efficient to have one big one.
It would be too big, and would.
What about the rainwater system? Is that even? We were encouraged to convert over to the.
What's the rainwater system? Yes, we want to convert to the rainwater system. Let's get more rain out here. Yeah. I mean, I will. My recommendation of the club is to go to more rain, more natural rain. That's my recommendation to the club. Yeah.
We didn't get any rain this year. So, we had virtually no rain.
We've had 0.8 inches.
Figure in that we're going to get an average rain next year. So I mean that will help a lot.
0.8 inches since July 15th. And most likely we're not going to get any rain until July 15th. So that will be an inch of rain over a year period of time. That is really challenging in a situation with what you guys have here.
Why does the driving range look so good as compared to the rest of the golf?
It's compaction. No,
It's the same soil, it's the same water, it's the same care.
We mow it so much higher, overseeding at a less rate. A little bit. So back in the day, car traffic does have an effect. Car traffic does have an effect on your golf course conditions here. Absolutely.
Oh, compaction.
It's a multitude of other things, but it certainly has an effect. Yeah, no doubt. You don't want to, that's a can of worms. Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, now we get there.
here, so it's on camera. Thanks, Jeff, appreciate that. So really, as Tom mentioned, we'll put the poll up on the website here within the next 48 hours and really get your feedback and kind of your ideas of, what you took out of the meeting here today and kind of what the thoughts are. Yes, the goal would be to look at, and from the Finance Committee side, the Finance Committee's looked really hard over the last month or so as we built budgets, and we're trying to come up with a great budget, for the club. We've actually got 3 versions going at this point, and the goal of that is to take into account these different amendment options. And amendments are the top dressing, and if we don't overseed one of the golf courses, 1 year, and then also the next golf course the next year, where those dollars can be reallocated to increase or, I guess, accelerate this process of top dressing the fairways and getting the soils better from that standpoint. So right now, within those 3 versions, one version, to be honest with you, doesn't even take into an account an operational dues increase, which obviously benefits the members from that standpoint. And the others do, involve a dues increase. That's, standard that comes through, membership. But if we can eliminate that, increase and accelerate the process of improving the fairways, I think it's a win-win for the members. But obviously, we want to get your feedback so the board and the Finance Committee can make an educated decision based on what the membership wants. Mr. Cummings?
Yeah, so you are assuring us that if we decide to not oversee, that those dollars that we save through no seed and savings in water will be applied to improve?
Correct. Correct. We're not just going to put it in the pocket. It's money that's going to be put back into the golf courses, and not just the not overseeded golf course, but also White Wing as well. So the ½ inch of sand that we're looking to utilize with the aggravator to top dress would be for both golf courses. But the dollars that we can reallocate from the overseed costs of Quail Run will help us to implement that and move it forward at a faster pace.
Anybody, you're going to have to move all the hedge up to the watering head?
You would, over a period of time, have to raise the heads. We have to do that naturally anyways. You would just accelerate how frequently you would have to do that. Every 4 or 5 years. The heads are placed on a pipe called a swing joint, so it has the ability to, the swing joint has the ability to sort of raise up easily, so you would do that over time.
Is that the program we have for the new heads, is that complete?
Yeah, all the new heads are installed at this point, so all the other old heads have been removed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are those good heads?
Yes.
Go back to the old.
Got it?
If one of the proposals here is that it's a good idea to not overseed, why are we not discussing not overseeding both golf courses rather than just not overseeding Quail?
I think there's an impact to membership. You have to be very careful. I think we're very beneficial because we have 36 holes, where a lot of courses are only an 18-hole facility. So I think it's really nice that we have the ability to not overseed one of the courses. And again, that's just the fairways. I mean, we would still be overseeding the tee boxes and the greens and green surrounds to create, a great experience from that standpoint. But being able to have 36 holes,
Is your question not oversee 36 holes in 1 year, or do you mean sort of commit to a rotating program?
Well, you're proposing not overseeding as a good thing. So if not overseeding 18 holes is a good thing, not overseeding 36 holes is a really good thing.
But there's another side to not overseeding, though, and that's you don't have quite the same winter playing conditions that you without overseeding that you do get with overseeding. So maybe going all in like that, well then if you wanted to continue that argument, we would never overseed ever, and that's just not practical. So not overseeding one course, considering not overseeding in another year is a way to sort of find the middle of the road that sort of satisfies everybody, but still gives us some agronomic improvements that have profound effects long term on the course.
So is the agreement then that the overseeded course will play better, and then unfortunately everybody will want to play that course and not the non-overseeded course?
Playing better is yes, and it's very subjective. You know, what plays good to one person plays bad to another. The idea of non-overseeding is not so much on the playability, but it's to improve long-term